Hey there. 3.23 introduced a bunch of variants of skill gems with the transfigured gem system, particularly quite a few trap gems. One that would stand out to me if gems were capable of standing is Explosive Trap of Shrapnel. It basically ignores the weakness of Explosive Trap, the poor AoE, and decidedly bangs both when clearing and when bossing. I also wanted to try out the new Sabotage variants of the mines, and Pyroclast Mine of Sabotage also turned out to be a great debuff skill. So this is a build guide whose main purpose is just to show that these two skills are both quite attractive, even if Penance Brand of Dissipation is the hottest dude on the block. Now, onto the build overview. The clear speed is rock solid. Trappers are not known for amazing clear speed unless using an auto-targeting skill like Exsanguinator Arc, where they then are sacrificing a lot of single-target damage and have to supplement it with the since heavily nerfed cooldown traps. May they rest in peace, or rot in hell, or whatever happens to dead explosives. However, with Explosive Trap of Shrapnel, you can have your bombs and eat them too. This is essentially the Wumbo version of Explosive Trap, wiping out the entire screen with just the increased AoE from Saboteur, and still packing a hefty punch for tankier rares and map bosses. The main thing holding the clear speed back is the build lacking any movement speed bonuses outside of flasks and boot movement speed increases, and of course, the small delay in damage that comes with all traps. The bossing is quite tasty. Saboteurs kill bosses. This is practically a tautology, and there is no exception here. While bosses with damage reduction on phase start will get one or two abilities off, just enough to show you that they care, they will know the true meaning of dying shortly after, because they will be dead. The absorption charges from Graven's Secret also allow you to tank certain pure elemental abilities really well, such as Shaper's Bullet Hell. Now for the effective HP. It's good enough. It's no Trickster, Champion, Juggernaut, Ivory Tower Templar, Block-Capped Glad, Necromancer. It's not a lot of things, but this build is definitely tanky enough for the damage it deals. With a decent hybrid health pool, 80-ish% evasion, and Saboteur's blind damage reduction, this Shadow is handsome enough to survive most mapping scenarios. For example, I was able to pretty comfortably level to level 97 while doing Maven invitations and the Wildwood at the same time, so it gets the job done. Just don't expect it to be able to face tank 10,000 Wisp, 100% Delirium, 140% Quantity, Burial Chambers, Awakened Uber Legion encounters. The sustain is fine, just don't tell mom. Probably the weakness of the build, you're mostly relying on Saboteur regen, Ghost Dance, your life flask, energy shield base recharge, and the absorption charge recuperation from Graven's Secret. The latter is a heavy lifter in certain situations like Uber Maven and Uber Shaper, but there is a good amount of kill or be killed when it comes to the long-term survivability of this build. How's the ease of play? It's pretty standard. Most of the gameplay just involves walking around and blowing dudes up with right-click, but there are a few extra buttons to press to unload this build's true potential in single target. Of specific note, due to relying on those pesky mine debuffs for full damage, some hectic fights like Uber Elder can get a little tricky as this build doesn't do anywhere near its full damage to frequently moving targets. But what about the fun factor? I think it's quite fun. From a personal perspective, it hits just right. It's got a skill that hits comically fast, a few extra buttons for bossing to keep things interesting, and it really fulfills the fantasy of a guy who just wants to see the world burn, but settles for blowing it up instead. One thing that definitely holds it back, however, in the fun department, is the complete lack of knowing what in God's good name is happening on the ground whilst doing damage, but that may just be a matter of preference. Overall, I'd recommend this build if you want a trapper that hits above their weight class when it comes to clear, still brings the pain to bosses, and just throws far too many explosives at each of his adversaries. Lastly, I'd like to note that the gear and tree used for this build is pretty standard power charge stacking stuff, so it's pretty easy to slot in whatever trap you'd like to use. Here's the finished passive tree for the build at level 97. It's mostly standard power charge stacker setup. taking a good mix of defensive and offensive wields since the power charges give such a huge amount of increased spell damage scaling. We use 4 unique jewels in this build, one being Immutable Force for the pseudo-stun immunity, another being a Militant Faith with the Dominus Keystone for big dam, and Elemental Resistance per 10 Devotion, which just helps cap resistances. We also use a Grace and a Discipline Watcher's Eye to smooth out recharge rate and to get closer to spell suppression cap since we're not using any offensive auras that have Watcher's Eye options anyways. And lastly, we're using a That Which Was Taken to get some nice offensive and defensive bonuses. For our Ascendancy, we are of course a Dapper Saboteur with Chain Reaction, Pyromaniac, Born in the Shadows, and Demolition Specialist, which just allows us to utilize the Pyroclast Mines of Sabotage without having to throw out 20 of them at once for the maximum damage bonus. We also take the Primal Huntress Ascendancy for the Banger Charm bonuses, and our Pantheon consists of Soul of the Brine King and either Soul of Ralakesh or Soul of Shikari. As always, more details are covered in the Path of Building, linked in the description. Now on to the gems. For your main setup, you've got Explosive Trap of Shrapnel, or Explosive Trapnel as I like to call it, along with the most important link, Charged Traps, which is like roids and crack at the same time for traps when you are charge stacking. Otherwise, it's mostly just supports that result in the most overall damage. For more consistency while mapping, you can also run cluster traps in place of swift assembly, although doing so will make you cap on traps really easily while bossing, and it will kneecap your damage in doing so. There are 2 curse setups, one with Bane and the other with Curse on Hit Frostblink, so you have 2 buttons to apply 5 different curses. Our weapon and shield contain our auras and Assassin's Mark, as well as a Cast on Damage Taken Wave of Conviction for a little bit of extra resistance shred, just to show the bosses that we care. And lastly, we have our mine setup with Pyroclast Mine of Sabotage. It's very important that this is the version of the skill that you use, as it provides a much stronger added damage aura when the mines are on the ground, as well as some throwing speed increases to make it feasible to use the mines without gumming up our other abilities too much. As far as using these mines go, just treat them like another debuff and use them when you are single target bursting. They are huge damage increase, they can roughly triple or quadruple your damage, but they are unnecessary for most things as Explosive Trap of Shrapnel is quite strong on its own. Now on to the gear, sire. The gearing consists of pretty standard charge stacking fare with some caveats. You've got your Malachai's Loop and Void Battery for max power charges and spell damage per charge. We've got Graven Secret, which doesn't seem very secret, everybody's using it, but it does provide a max power charge and the ability to generate absorption charges for a bit of extra energy shield recovery. You've got Badge of the Brotherhood for max frenzy charges based on your max power charges. You've got Anathema for a whole gaggle of curses that you can use based on your max power charges. And finally, you have Ralakesh's Impatience for cheesing all of the charge benefits without needing to actually generate them. Special note on the implicit here, the +2 levels to trap and mine gems is a really huge bonus for boss damage, as scaling the effect of Pyroclast Mine of Sabotage is quite silly. 2 levels on this gem at 20 is equivalent to roughly 5 gem levels at 20 on Explosive Trap, so it's a really good corruption to have. We also use Slave Driver's Hand to benefit from all the cast speed that our frenzy charges and other uniques are providing, as well as being able to afford to throw our traps because they would cost an unhealthy amount of mana otherwise. Now that leaves us with just 3 rare slots, some jewel slots, and charms to fix our resistances with. Thanks to charms and some Val implicits elsewhere, however, the rares don't need to have much resistances on them, but getting some better pieces than what I have here may allow you to get stronger defensive mods on another charm, or maybe your belt implicit. This build also has the nice bonus of having really strong offensive charm options without relying on the more sought after mods like crit multi per power charge. You get things like chance to throw additional traps, covering enemies in ash, and Culling Strike, all of which are really big chunks of damage, and you can also run stuff like Area of Effect per power charge charms to commit even larger, more widespread war crimes. So, you know, that's nice. Charms and That Which Was Taken also hard carry evasion scaling on this build, providing an effective 187% evasion rating, So once those are gone, this build will probably look much more similar to your standard glass cannon-esque trappers, albeit with some opportunity to use something like an evasion rating per frenzy charge synthesized implicit ring. This being an evasion build, it's also really nice to have some sources of physical damage taken conversion, with a taste of hate, a shield corruption, and maybe a helmet or chest mod to do so. Future leagues will probably ask you to have better resistances on rares and to fill out another Val implicit with elemental resistances, and just to simply be squishier, at least when mapping. All of this is of course assuming Ralakesh's Impatience stays the same in function and availability, which it should, right? Right? Lastly, the flasks for this character are just pretty standard stuff. Bleed removal on your life flask, and cast speed, move speed, and evasion rating on your other flask suffixes, while running that taste of hate to cool off while you're incinerating baddies with copious amounts of hellfire. I also like to swap out a couple flasks for a quartz flask and an enkindled bottled faith for bossing. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Consider liking the video or maybe subscribing if you found it helpful, and want more videos in the future that are about PoE and maybe some other ARPGs like Last Epoch and PoE 2. And yeah, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. See ya!